2 years ago, we awarded Philip Birsch of Playbill our Friend of Off-Broadway Award. And in the spirit of friendship, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Philip Birsch, president of Playbill and friend of Off-Broadway, to present our next award for a legend of Off-Broadway. Philip? Come on. Yeah,
many will want this.
that's right.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm happy and proud to be a friend of Off-Broadway's. I aspire to be legend, and I realize some of you know that I might not make it, but I aspire. I have the joy of introducing my dear uncle, Merle. Now, he isn't really my uncle. My family should be so lucky, but he is the best uncle I could ever have. Merle Debuskey is a man who is a legend to me for years and now happily a legend to all of you. He's a person whose mold was broken, sadly, right after he was born. He was born in 1923 in Maryland, his beloved Baltimore, where he decided that sports was one of his main focuses, and this legend of Baltimore sports became an All-American in a number of sports that I hadn't even heard of until I was older. Apparently, they've been playing lacrosse for the past many years. I think he started with the Sioux Indians in the early 1900s. Well, no. He also was a football player in college and a boxer when couldn't play anything else. And that wasn't enough. He went into the Army and in World War II found himself in the South Pacific on an LST-574 ship that, if anyone had seen this ship, you first would question whether it would actually could float, and then you would actually wonder after they put all those tanks on it as he was delivering them to the men fighting overseas if it actually could float thereafter. He saved the ship once, and he saw a lot of action. Coming home, he went to school and finished his degree, and then wondered what he would do with his life and decided that he would go and get a degree at the New School for Social Research in Public Relations. To this day, I am uncertain how that happened and why he chose that of all things. He wanted to be a writer, but he chose that. And upon emerging from that, he decided, again, to my confusion, that he wanted to be a press agent, which was a fairly, I think, bold thing to want to do. And upon deciding that, he decided that he would begin his career working on something called Off-Broadway, which he helped found. Many years ago, in the summer of 1949, way back when, the Off-Broadway theaters had a battle with AEA. He was a nascent publicity agent and one of the men who helped found the Off-Broadway League. The AEA decided that they would shut down 5 shows that did not have the appropriate contract with AEA. This was going to cripple this nascent and burgeoning industry of Off-Broadway. The AEA came to my dear friend Merle for his advice and counsel, and then for all of you who know, he was a boxer and a fighter, and those tactics came in very handy. And he inspired and created and helmed a media attack on the AEA, which they had never really felt before of this kind. And to his success of bringing this attack to the public, because he was apparently a very good publicity agent, the AEA decided they had to negotiate. Much to the AEA's dismay, they found that the officers of the newly founded league wanted Merle to negotiate. And to the dismay of all of the AEA, he was the man who actually put into place what is the beginning of the AEA contract, the first with Off-Broadway, the very first, which is one of the reasons why these actors were able to go back to work all 5 shows reopened, and they were able to begin a off-Broadway season, and he saved the season and may have saved and helped off-Broadway in its early years. In 1952, he abandoned off-Broadway for Broadway, so don't be so happy with him. He had to make a living, and so he moved off-Broadway. He moved to Broadway. He did not abandon off-Broadway. I kid you all. He did not abandon off-Broadway, but he did start a career on Broadway. And over the next, 44 years, he represented approximately 500 shows on and off Broadway, setting a record that I don't believe that anyone could ever come near. That or Joe DiMaggio's 56 hits in a row in the season, I think, are unmatchable records that no one will come close to. He was such a good at-pan professional that he was, for 25 consecutive years, he was chairman and president of at-pan for 25 straight years for his leadership in the industry. He has also been a life member of the Actors Fund. He is one of the founders, members of Broadway Cares. He is an activist. He has been a man of unusual loyalty to freedom, unusual loyalty to people's rights. He's one of the only men I know who has a FBI file that you can't pretty much read. It's all blacked out. And he was named, to his pride, a New York State subversive during the 50s. Yes. Just remember, as I like to say, it takes an irritant to make a pearl, okay? All right, and which I'll explain later also what that means. And he's also one of the few men in America who not only has an FBI file and is a New York State subversive, but is also one of the 199 men to have a quote on a statue at the Freedom Museum in Chicago, with the likes of Thomas Jefferson. So this is an interesting fellow. He was elected to the Theater Hall of Fame this past year. I was proud to be there. And he also has, for those of you who live at 411 West End Avenue, he's on the board of that co-op, so if you have any questions, you can discuss that with him as well. I am proud to hand this award to my great uncle Merle, who has had an incredible career fighting for off-Broadway, Broadway, fighting for the rights of individuals, and fighting for all his friends through the blacklist and other times in America. He is a loyal, great man. If you needed someone on your side in a fight, it's best to call Merle. Merle?
I want to thank Phil for those greatly exaggerated pandemics. It's obvious that he prefers fiction to biography. I also,
That's his book. It's all in his book.
I very much would like to thank the Off-Broadway Alliance for becoming a legend, and would like to confess it's a lot easier than hauling a sword out of a rock. I had some remarks that I would like to make, but unfortunately my nephew stole them. Also, I thought it would be kind of stupid of me to talk to this assemblage about off-Broadway very simply because you are off-Broadway. But I did find a notch where I thought you might indulge me if I made a couple of remarks about the beginnings of Off-Broadway, because it started oddly enough and remarkably enough and romantically enough and adventurously enough in 1948. And I think, as far as I know, I'm the only one left who was there. I don't know if anybody else was here, so I'd like to meet them. Very quickly, the Off-Broadway, which was not named Off-Broadway, it had no name at that time. In 1948, the theater consisted of Broadway. There was no away from Broadway. And the difficulty of creative artists to get started was enormous. So World War II provided the access. It had a plan called the GI Bill. And a number of people, veterans, enrolled at the New School of Social Research, and we took courses in the evening so we could do what we wanted during the day, but more importantly, we got $25 a week. We also, after classes, used to hang out in the village because it was not yet gentrified. It was like a transplanted Tuscany village, and everything was quite safe because if you walk down McDougal Street or Sullivan Street, in front of every now and then there was a house which had a plate glass window covering it which said social club. The families of all these folks, the parents all lived in this neighborhood, and those social clubs were such that no one of evil intent would dare enter the village. These two fellows that I knew we used to hang out because you could go to a saloon or a bar and for 10 cents you could get a beer, and they didn't care if you stayed there all night. And a couple of these guys started talking about something about which I knew nothing, and that was they wanted to form a cooperative theater. So I used to listen because I had no idea what that was all about. And I wasn't interested. I wanted to get a job. And I went in and I auditioned and interviewed many places, and I learned something. I was unemployable. So as we sat down there drinking beers with these people, and they started assembling a group, and next thing you know, holy cow, you should see the ladies that were assembled. Kim Stanley, B. Arthur. I said, my goodness gracious, this is some profession. They fired their press agent before they started. And for reasons I won't go into now. Anyway, they said to me, why don't you be the press agent? And I said, well, I don't know what that means, but I don't want to be a press agent. I want to be a member of the cooperative. And they said, okay, so that was it. Now, we had to find a place to play, right? New York was a pretty big place, and they decided that the safety of the village, plus the fact it still had a shadow of its former status, Bohemian, I think it was called, in the 20s and 30s, and lots of writers lived there. And we thought, well, that might be a pleasant kind of a place to play. But we had to find a theater. And they located the Provincetown Playhouse, which was, all of you know what that was about, except at this point it had been either owned or rented to a tacky group of light opera. I think they were Gilbert and Sullivan, I'm not sure. And they existed by having apprentices or students come in, and that's the way they spent their winter. In the summers, they went upstate somewhere and left the building to the cats. So when we moved in, the first thing we had to do was clean it up. And I, having been a lieutenant in the Navy, was a senior officer, so I was in charge of the scheduling. And everybody had to do something, and I tell you, I still have a very vivid memory of enjoying watching Kim Stanley swabbing the men's bathroom. Also, one of the next responsibilities was to pick the plays. So these were very wise people, and they said, well, we'll pick 3 very popular plays. E. E. Cummings' Hymn, Sean Casey's Within the Gates, and I forgot the third one. Anyway, it was absolutely absurd, but so was the whole idea. So we started. The first play was directed by Alexis Solomos, whom you know later became the director of the Greek National Theater. And nobody paid any attention to us. None of the major media did. They had no idea what that was all about, but certainly it wasn't respectable. And we lived with the cooperation of the village people. There was the Villager, which is a newspaper, and their magazines. And we went around and gave handouts to every church and saloon in the area. And we managed to scrape by, again, because of World War II. There now was a program called the 5220 Club. Now we were getting $20 a week, which may not seem like a lot today, but we managed to drink and feed. I won't go into any details about how we slept, but let me tell you, it was fun. The E. Cummings play, Him, sold out, but then we decided that this was ridiculous. The company, as it was ill-formed. There were too many people who did not have enough to contribute, and the wisdom was, we'll have a vote. Everybody votes for 10, and the 10 most votes would remain, and everybody else would leave the cooperative. And we did. The people left the cooperative got all the money. Those of us who remained got nothing, but that didn't stop us. I won't go into what followed because it would take too much time, but we eventually wound up in 1949 as a theater that I think it bore the name Off-Broadway for the very first time. It was called Off-Broadway, Inc., and again, the core was Kim Stanley, Gene Sachs, B. Arthur, Michael Gatso, Anthony Franciosa, to name a few. Excuse me, when you get to be my age, you're lucky if you know where you are. And we didn't know exactly what to do. Also, I think, as Phil stole my material, there were the first year of the Interplayers, as we were called, in 1948, had inspired a lot of people in the theater who wondered what could they do to become a part of the theater. And very quickly, a group from Yale went down, took the Provincetown Playhouse, Studio 7, they were called, the Interplayers. Those that remained went up to Carnegie Playhouse and did Cockle-Doodle Dandy with Jack Palance, who was then Marlon Brando's understudy, playing the lead, etc. There were 5 of us. Anyway, Off-Broadway, Inc., what were we going to do? One of the persons who had come in with us in this new group was a director named Lamont Johnson. Lamont was a veteran. At the end of World War II, he was in Paris, where he had the remarkable opportunity where he became a regular guest at Gertrude Stein's salon in Paris. I trust that some of you know who Gertrude Stein was. At that time, in 1949, she was perhaps the most significant icon of culture in the Western world. He, while he had been there, learned that she had written a play. She had never been known to have written a play before, that he spoke to her about but hadn't read. So he said, gee whiz, if we can get the rights to that play, bingo. Now, how are we going to get it? You know, the rights were held by a remarkable man, American rights were. And again, the only non-creative individual in the group was sent up there to get the rights. It was given to us very quickly. It was called Yes, It's for a Young Man. It opened. Commerce Street was loaded with limos. Every major critic came down to review it, and they were all raves. It was fantastic. And we sold out and raised our salaries to $35. And from then on, my nephew stole my material about how equity came in and knocked us off, and an asshole went up to and resolve the problem.